broadcasting from the Community Service Radio Studio at the Pop Music Academy in Sellersburg, Indiana. Welcome to Dangerous Subversive Radio. Prepare to open your mind and question everything. Good evening, and welcome to episode 17 of Dangerous Subversive Radio. I am your host, Tim Rotalick, which sounds kind of silly since I'm the only one who is ever on the screen. And I am joined by the man behind the curtain, master engineer and producer Jackie Smith.
Hi.
Now, you do know that that's a reference to the Wizard of Oz, right?
I think it is, yes.
Yes.
Man behind the curtain?
The man behind the curtain. Did I say the man behind the screen?
Yeah, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So anyhow, Jackie, can you give us an update on our antenna, our broadcast antenna?
Well, what's happening is we have a staff, and I just need to assemble everything, throw it together, but I also need to buy a couple metal boxes and things like that, and some more cable and connectors, and we run everything through the walls, but it's getting there.
We are making progress.
Oh, yes,
for
we
the day
are.
when we will be a broadcast radio
That's
station.
right. The staff is back there behind that wall.
And how many on staff here?
How many on staff? There's four on staff
Really?
here.
Cool.
Why, yes, you're one of them. You teach what?
Bass.
That's right.
Bass at the Pop Music Academy in Sellersburg, Indiana.
That's right. And Austin teaches.
Drums.
Good. And Drew teaches.
Beginning guitar.
And voice.
And voice.
And keyboard.
She teaches keyboard?
Yes, she does.
I tell you, I got to tell you about this young woman. Do you think she'd mind being mentioned on the show?
No, she would like it.
Her name is Drew Alexander.
Yeah.
She is a young woman is she a mezzo?
She's a soprano.
She's a soprano.
Yeah.
She doesn't think she's any good, but let me
Holy
tell you
smokes,
this. This
listen
is
to
the
her.
way I describe Alexander's voice. It is like polished cherry wood.
Yeah.
There's this sparkle and this shine on top, and just below the surface is this rich, deep color that just sends chills up your spine when you hear her sing.
Yeah, I totally agree. She's amazing.
Yeah, okay.
What a great teacher, too. Oh, and by the way, I teach voice.
That's right. Jackie Smith is a vocal pedagogist.
That's pretty good. You got that down pat.
Which is, it's like the Marines when contrasted with the Army. You can have a voice teacher. That's the Army. But your vocal pedagogist is the Marines, right?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think that really soon we are going to have to make the leap to somehow finding a way to include our live audience on the show.
Wouldn't that be great?
Some way of interacting with them and getting their point of view. Some sort of call-in feature.
Well, you know what? When we have a live audience, they can Skype in to us, and we can connect with them that way. Just give our Skype address online.
Cool. And
just whoever gets to it first, and maybe give a couple addresses so we can put people in line. No big deal there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking forward
and we could do numbers too, phone numbers, but these days it seems like people are moving to Skype. For the
I would like to do
interviews.
that.
Yeah.
I would like to Skype with my family members in Colorado.
Yeah, see, that'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll go over really well on this show.
Okay. Oh, well, I meant just in the comfort of my own home, Skype with my family members. But, last week we talked about several things. And looking back on the show, listening to it, I realized that a few of the things I said might have sounded a little mean-spirited. And if anyone who knows me knows that I am not a mean-spirited person, and so I really would like to clear these things up. We were talking about, first of all, I expressed a little bit of skepticism at the existence of 63 genders and counting. And I expressed the opinion that perhaps this is not genetic, but could best be explained by a very, very large number of personal idiosyncrasies. And the fact is that I don't have to recognize your gender in order to treat you with respect and kindness, just like I do everyone else. I don't even consider a person's gender when I'm preparing to deal with them. I don't say, oh, well, this person's gender is such and such, so I have to treat them in this way in order to honor their gender. I don't do that. I just treat everybody the same. But if you're not willing to accept my respect until I jump through several little hoops for you, such as referring to you as they when you're obviously a single person, I have to wonder how much my respect is worth to you. And is it really the respect you're after, or is it the hoops? I also have to wonder if you are really that injured, or if you are simply, as I said last week, recognizing an opportunity to exert great influence with very little effort, against which any resistance is going to be viewed in a very poor light. As a matter of fact, if you looked up in a dictionary right now and it said offended, adjective, recognizing an opportunity to exert great influence with very little effort, against which resistance is going to be viewed in a very unfavorable light, would you really be all that shocked if you found that definition these days? So we also mentioned, I was in the middle of mentioning diversity. We were talking about diversity, and Jackie brought up the subject of sweatshops. And I didn't really see where he was going with it, and so I did not really give the response that I should have. What I was meaning, my point was that people don't generally leave one job and take another unless it's going to be an improvement of their life. And the same is true of any place that you would call a sweatshop. People are not going to go to work in this place you call a sweatshop unless it is better than what they had before. Often, in many third world countries, the alternative to the sweatshops, especially for women, is prostitution. So if you've gotten them out of prostitution and into a sweatshop, are you really being all that evil to them? Now, is it still exploitive? Maybe. If you're paying them a tiny fraction of what you can afford to pay them, then yes, it could be said that you're exploiting them. But with the average profit margin being not 37%, as most people think, but actually somewhere nearer to 3%, what an employer can afford to pay their employees is a whole lot less than what a lot of people would have you believe. Once that 3% is used up, and by the way, that takes your profit margin down to zero, any other increases in the wages are going to have to be reflected in an increase in the price of the product. So it would be great if we could pay them all $15 an hour. But if that takes the price of the product up to 2 or 3 times the price of your competitor's product, what's going to happen then? You're going to go out of business. They're going to go back to being exploited by your competitors. And who really has been helped then? Now, Jackie's point last week was that if you are buying products from this sweatshop, in a way, you're kind of perpetuating the situation. And if you're advocating bringing in illegal aliens to harvest crops in the United States, and to do jobs that you say Americans won't do, well, then you're actually contributing to the perpetuation of a lack of diversity in agricultural. We also talked about the new PC diversity, in which every economic facet of a society must exactly mirror the makeup of the population in general, or else it's racist. So if you've got a population that is roughly, 70% Caucasian, 13% Black, 17% Latino, then your police force must be 70% white and 13% Black and 17% Latino. And the tailoring industry must be 70% white and 13% Black and 17% Latino. The construction industry must also be 70% white, 13% Black, 17% Latino, or else you're a racist. Well, the fact is, you don't find that kind of exact mirroring anywhere else in the world. I can't speak to now, but I can tell you that 20 years ago, if you traveled across the South in the United States and stopped at every hotel you came to, you would smell Middle Eastern cooking in the office of every single one of them. And by the way, it smelled great. But that's my point, is that in any society, different ethnicities tend to specialize in different economic activities. So my final point on that is naturally occurring diversity is great. Artificial, manufactured, mandated, enforced diversity has absolutely no intrinsic value whatsoever. And by the way, did you notice that there's no piece to this puzzle that says political orientation? We find sexual orientation, but no, not political orientation. That's because this kind of diversity is all about having people who all look different as long as they all think exactly alike. So that I hope we've cleared up a couple things about last week's show. Some people may think it was still mean-spirited, but, you know, whatever.
I loved it.
Okay, well, thank you. The Freedom Bell. The Statue of Freedom. The man who shot Freedom Valance. Have you ever wondered? People use the words freedom and liberty interchangeably these days, but there is a difference. I prefer the word freedom, but the difference between freedom and liberty is that liberty is freedom tempered with morality. Now, take a bunch of Vikings, looting, pillaging, ransacking, raping, burning towns on the coast of Britain. They had freedom. They were exercising complete and total freedom. But people with liberty, as these American colonists are representing in my little montage, they would say, I could do that, but I won't, because it's wrong. And really, you know, for the rest of the show, we can use them interchangeably if we want. I just wanted to get in a shot of John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny lies in keeping them ignorant. Those aren't my words. They were spoken by a man named Maximilien Robespierre. He was a French lawyer and politician and one of the best known and most influential figures associated with the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. See, while we were writing, roughly the same time we were writing our Constitution, the French were having their revolution. And ours was not really a revolution, believe it or not. Ours was a war for independence. There is a difference. A revolution takes place, a political revolution takes place within a country. Russia was still Russia after the Russian Revolution. France was still France after the French Revolution. So the reason it's called a revolution, in any other context, what would you think? You'd think a wheel turning around. Well, that wheel starts here. It does one complete revolution, and it comes back to the same place it was. France's was truly a revolution. Started with the tyranny of the kings, or the monarchs. Went through the revolution, and where did they wind up? Under the tyranny of the new government. And they went through a 2-year period forever known throughout history to the rest of the world as the Reign of Terror. And do you remember what the battle cry of the French Revolution was? Liberty, equality, fraternity. Well, during the Reign of Terror, about 40,000 people were murdered. Not much liberty, equality, or fraternity for them, was there? So, what am I getting at? Robespierre, influential figure during the Reign of Terror. So, when you go back to his own quote, the secret of freedom lies in educating people. whereas the secret of tyranny lies in keeping them ignorant. What side of that quote do you think he came down on? And it's one quote. You may say it's one quote by one man, but we wouldn't be remembering it. I wouldn't be quoting it to you almost 230 years later if there was not something to it. I hold in my hand this little book. This is my personal copy of the United States Constitution, complete with highlighting. Actually, this is the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and it's still only that big. I would say probably the majority of people in this country have not read this book. Would you agree with that, Jackie?
Yeah, I would. I sure would.
And not always for illegitimate reasons. Some people think they hear the Constitution and they think it's going to be this great, big, daunting task. I know one person who, until several years ago, sincerely thought that the Constitution was every law that had ever been passed in the United States. And is this person an unintelligent person? Absolutely not. Now, there is something like that. It's called the Federal Register, and that is every law that Congress has ever passed goes into the Federal Register. I'm happy to say these days that person knows the complete difference. Some people think it's going to be written in a foreign language. Well, there are a few little differences between 18th century English and 21st century English. Not that big that you can't understand it. A lot of people think they're just not going to be able to wrap their heads around the ideas in here. I saw a YouTube video once of this lively discussion among a group of people. And this woman was talking about how the Supreme Court, they're the ones who interpret the Constitution. And somebody else in the crowd says, no, I've read it, I understand it. And this is the quote that sticks in my head from that video. She looked at him and she said, "You are not qualified to interpret the Constitution." I'm telling you here and now, no interpretation required. The Constitution was written in the plain language of the day for anyone to read and understand. I guarantee you, every school kid in the country 200 years ago read this. And not only read it, but studied it until they understood it. And reading it once, you may understand it, you may not. You know, there's a great scene from a movie called A Fish Called Wanda. And in this scene, Kevin Kline is defending his intellect after Jamie Lee Curtis calls him an ape. And he says to her, "Apes don't read philosophy." To which Jamie Lee Curtis replies, "Yes, they do, Otto. They just don't understand it." There's a difference between reading and understanding. I read this again last night. Took me about an hour. Just looking for some of the points we're going to talk about tonight. We're not going to hit the whole Constitution, and there's a reason why I picked the points out that I did. Some people will tell you that this was written by a bunch of rich white slave owners who had no interest whatsoever in any object other than remaining rich white slave owners. They'll tell you that the evidence is right here in the document. I'd like to read to you one of those places. It is in Article 1, Section 2. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. There you had it. According to them, a slave was only 3/5 of a person, wasn't even a whole person. How do we get slaves? Well, we start with the whole number of free persons, including those bound to a service for a term of years. Those are indentured servants. It's kind of like slave light. They were bound to work for whoever had paid their way from the old world for a number of years in order to earn their freedom. For that number of years, they weren't free. Okay, so we take about free persons and all those and excludes the Indians who were not taxed. And who do you have left? The slaves. So here's your evidence. Slaves are only 3/5 of a person. Well, were they a bunch of racists and bigots if a slave was only 3/5 of a person? Well, here's this passage right here. I'll let you read it for yourself. Look at that first sentence. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. They're talking about apportioning representatives. They're not sitting around discussing and determining the relative humanity of different races. Why would they do that? Do you really think the Constitutional Convention, they sat around and said, well, I believe a slave is only 3/5 of a person. Oh, no, you're wrong. They're only half a person. That's ridiculous. So does this describe how much of a person they thought a slave was? No. All it's doing is describing a formula by which the representation is going to be determined among the people of the states. The very next paragraph says that the number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000. So are they saying that a free person, is only 1/30,000th of a representative? No. In my opinion, this is a deliberate attempt to distort the meaning of the Constitution by people who are counting on you not having read this, and sure as heck counting on you not having studied it until you understand it. So what was the real intent? Even back in that time, slavery was mainly practiced in the southern part of the country. Most anti-slave people were in the northern part of the country. And when they're deciding how to apportion representatives, well, the South wanted every slave counted. So they were the good guys, right? To them, a slave was a whole person. And with the massive numbers of slaves in the South, that would have given them a permanent voting majority in Congress. Now, with that permanent voting majority, when it came to the issue of slavery, how do you think the southern states are going to vote? Okay. Now, the people in the North wanted the slaves counted not at all. So they were the bad guys, right? Because anyone who says slaves aren't persons are the bad guys. Anyone who denies the humanity of any particular group of people are the bad guys, right? Just like the people who will tell you that this is not a person are the bad guys, right? Right? Okay. Whatever. I'm sorry, but...
So, Tim, what are we looking at there for the people in the radio audience?
That is an unborn baby.
Ah, got it.
Yes. And I'm sorry, but you painted yourself into that corner yourself. And for those of you who have no idea what just happened, that was a rhetorical statement aimed at some of our liberal viewers. But back to our discussion. So they came up with a compromise, and somewhere in the middle. And isn't a compromise? Isn't that the hallmark of civility? Here's the next thing that really ticks people off. Proves that there are a bunch of rich white slave owners who intend to stay rich white slave owners. Article 1, Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 per person. Not 3/5 of a person. Now, what kind of person gets imported to the United States? Again, they're talking about slavery, the slave trade. Well, that's it right there. They're protecting slavery. If they intended to get rid of it, why not just ban it? Well, let me ask you this. These were very smart men. If they wanted to protect slavery forever, wouldn't a better way to say it, wouldn't this be a better way to say it? Slavery shall be protected forever. Why this roundabout way of saying, well, we're not going to prohibit importing of slaves before 1808? So that strongly implies that after 1808, it could be and probably would be banned, the importation of slaves. Therefore, sowing the seeds of the demise of slavery.
Tim, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like that is what that article is talking about.
Yeah.
It's saying goodbye to slavery.
Exactly. Saying goodbye to slavery. So why didn't they just ban it? Well, when you're trying to create a country, it's generally wise not to instantly decimate the economy of one half of it. Something that big, that institutionalized, you got to get rid of it a piece at a time. So they said it won't be prohibited prior to 1808, could and probably would be prohibited after 1808. So again, they reached a compromise. And isn't a compromise the hallmark of civility? Actually, I don't think it is. A lot of people are under the impression that slavery is something which was committed by American whites against African blacks. Of all the slaves taken out of Africa, what percentage would you say were brought to the United States? 5% of them were brought to the United States. Most of them went to the Caribbean. White slave traders did not journey into the interior of Africa to capture slaves and bring them out for sale as slaves in the United States. The people who did go into the interior of Africa and capture slaves and bring them to the coast to sell them to the slave traders were other Africans with skins just as dark as the people they were capturing and selling into slavery. The Chinese had slaves. The ancient Egyptians had slaves. The Aboriginal Americans had slaves. Over the course of human history, slavery has been practiced in more countries on this planet than not. And over the course of human history, what group do you think has enslaved more Africans than any other? That's right. Muslims. Boy, have I got to hear it now. So my point is that slavery is not a uniquely American sin. But when it comes to slavery, America is almost unique in one way. We ended it. Okay, next thing that ticks people off. This is a long passage. As a matter of fact, I got to find it here. Okay, and so I hope you'll bear with me because it is important for me to read most of it, at least to illustrate it. This is Article 2, Section 1. And I'm going to lube up before this. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, equal to the number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. This is where the Electoral College comes from, which ticks a lot of people off. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall make a list of all the persons voted for, and the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify, and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States and directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the voters shall then be counted. The persons having the greatest number of votes shall be the President. Okay? Here's the thing. The electors count the votes. Okay, they are not just a bunch of people who come in and say, well, okay, I'm going to vote for whoever I want for president. And here's the thing. There are exactly as many electors in your state as you have representatives and senators in your state. They're chosen by your state. They are not chosen by a cabal of special interests, and if you believe they are, that's something that you need to take up with your state legislature. So your state has just as many electors as you have representatives. And each elector is honor bound. He is just as honor bound to count those votes and cast his vote according to what they were than your representative is honor bound to represent your best interests. So it doesn't really make any more sense to get rid of the Electoral College, in my opinion, than it is to just get rid of your representatives in Congress and have every single issue that comes up in the United States decided by a plebiscite. Now that ticks a lot of people off, but that's the point that I wanted to make, is that the electors represent you. They are just as honor bound to represent you as your representatives are. And people say, well, once the electors get in there, they can vote any way they want. And soon as your representatives get in there, they can vote any way they want. They are no more honor bound than the electors. So why did they have the Electoral College? Why did they come up with it in the first place? Well, back then, just as it is now, the population was not evenly distributed across the countryside. Highly concentrated in the cities, very sparsely populated in the rural areas. A politician could win any election simply by campaigning in the cities, never visiting in the rural areas, never listening to the ideas of the people in the rural areas, never considering their views or their values or their beliefs, never, ever actually representing them. Just get the votes of the people in the cities. Well, today it is much the same. I am going to have to describe this for our listening audience. You can find this on the internet if you want to see it for yourself. It is a population map of the United States showing the areas in which 51% of the population lives. Lots of Southern California, lots of New England, lots of Florida, and a couple little dots across the rest of the country. This is, any politician could easily win an election only by campaigning in these blue areas, never visiting the gray areas, never listening to their ideas, never considering their views, their values, their beliefs, never, ever representing them. You say you want to get rid of the Electoral College so that everyone has a voice. I guarantee you, you do that, and the people in the gray areas of this map will never again have a voice. Do you really think a politician who could win simply by campaigning in the blue areas is ever going to visit the gray areas? If you do, you are a lot more Pollyanna than I am. So that is why we have the Electoral College. You say you want democracy so that everyone will have equal rights. Under democracy, the minority never has any rights, ever. The electors are apportioned by population, just as your representatives in Congress, and in equal numbers. And, you would know this stuff if this were taught in schools.
If what was taught in schools?
The Constitution was
good.
taught in schools. Let me see. I got a little ahead of myself in the slides here. Okay. Here we go. The Second Amendment. We're just going to hit a couple of the amendments. And you'll notice over watching these shows that I have shied away from doing a show on the Second Amendment. One reason is it's just been done to death. But I can still offer something new here. Here's how it reads. A well-regulated militia being essential to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, that's about the National Guard, isn't it? No, it's not about the National Guard. First of all, you have to consider some of the differences between 18th century English and 21st century English. Regulated militia. Well, the word regulated back then was defined as well-calibrated and functioning as designed. Okay. The militia was termed, was defined as every able-bodied person, or actually every able-bodied man, between the ages of 16 and 60. Okay. And there was a reason why they referred to the militia. The United States did not intend to have a standing army during peacetime. The standing army of the British Empire occupying the colonies was one of the main motivations for fighting the American War for Independence. So you got to consider some of the words here. The next words, essential to the security of a free state. Why not just say essential to the security of a state? Why stick that free in there? That adjective, to me, says that it's not the state that you are protecting, but the freedom of that state. So a well-regulated militia, the people, armed as they were back then, being essential to maintaining the freedom of their state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If it was about the militia, wouldn't this be a better way to say it? The right of the militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These guys knew the English language, probably a lot better than a lot of us today. Now, some people will imply that supporters of the Second Amendment are all afraid of it being repealed. And they like to point out, well, to repeal that would require an amendment. And to do that, you've got to get a 2/3 majority vote in both houses of Congress, and then ratified by 75% of the states. And that's just not going to happen. And they like to imply that supporters of the Second Amendment are somehow dense or uninformed for not knowing this. But let me point out that it does not say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be repealed. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You do not have to repeal it to deprive people of its protection. All you have to do is appoint activist judges who will legislate from the bench and place such onerous restrictions on it that it is rendered meaningless. That is what supporters of the Second Amendment are concerned about. It has never been repealed, and yet for decades in Chicago, in New York, in Washington, D.C., only criminals have had guns. And those areas have consistently had the highest murder rates in the country. That the restrictions on the Second Amendment, which have been mounting for decades now, that's what they're concerned about. Okay, on to the next amendment we're going to look at. The 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Here's how it reads. Sorry, I've got to find it in here. 10th Amendment. There it is. The powers not delegated to the United States, and by that they meant the Congress, the federal government, by the Constitution. All powers not delegated to the Constitution or to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it. I'm sorry. Let me start over again. I want to make this perfectly clear for everyone. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved for the states respectively or to the people. Now, I have referred to this many times, to the 18 things that the Congress is authorized to do by the Constitution. These are the powers that are delegated to the Congress by the Constitution. And I need to read them one more time. I will summarize them and paraphrase where it would not infringe on the meaning of these words. But the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States, to coin money, regulate the value thereof, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, to establish post offices and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. That's copyright law. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas. To declare war. To raise and support armies. To provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, and to provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the nation, and to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. Okay, that is what Congress is authorized to do by the Constitution. So let's go back and look at Amendment number 10 in light of that. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, in that list of everything I gave you, did you find any mention of the redistribution of wealth, or social engineering, or education, or healthcare? There's not a single thing in the Constitution prohibiting the states from taking care of any one of those things. And it is not in the list of things that Congress is authorized to do. All of those things are reserved for the states or the people. For Congress to delve into those areas is the very essence of being unconstitutional. Well, we can't leave this stuff to the states. Well, this has to be done in Washington. Well, where do you think the people in Washington came from? The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny lies in keeping them ignorant. Which side of that quote do you think I've come down on tonight? Which side do you think your government has come down on in deliberately ceasing to teach this document to you? I've always said that once you learn how to read, no one can stop you from learning. They can try, but if you've got the determination, they cannot stop you. I also saw a post on Facebook recently that said you should be required to read a book for every 10 selfies you take. Start with this book. It's only that thick. And then read it again as many times as you need to where you understand it. And then follow it up with this book. It's called Dangerous Subversive Heresies. And it is by yours truly, Tim Rotalick. You may have noticed that I did not hit on the First Amendment tonight, and that's because I did not want any spoiler alerts for the absolutely excellent chapter on the First Amendment in this book. Believe it or not, it all comes down to 3 little words, which have been misused to bamboozle the American public for decades and decades. I guarantee you will never look at the First Amendment the same way again. Tonight, I'd kind of like to let the book speak for itself. Think of all the hundreds of people from whom you learned about the world, and all the hundreds of people from whom they learned about the world. Then throw in all the people who want to sell you something and all the people who think it's perfectly okay to lie to you as long as they're doing it for your own good. Pretty soon you can start to see that your view of the world might very well be a copy of a copy of a copy, each one a little fuzzier than the one before. When you go looking for the original, you can find some pretty surprising things. You're invited along on one regular Joe's personal journey to the farthest reaches of the realm, mixing conversation, storytelling, history, and humor in a search for that most elusive of quarries, the truth. I hope you come back for episode 18. I hope you bring some friends. I hope you grow to be 100 million strong. But right now, I hope you have a good night.